All right, wonderful. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Council study session of Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. I now call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Madam Clerk, will you please do the roll call?
Councilmember Chavez.
Here.
Councilmember Gameros.
Here.
Councilmember Harlan.
Here.
Councilmember Harper. Absent. Councilmember Reynolds.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mar is absent. Mayor Stevens.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have one study session item today. We're going to have in a minute the city clerk read the title to that, and then we're going to have a presentation, and then the public comment with respect to the study session item will follow that. Public comments during study session are 2 minutes. So if you have to shorten your presentation, you'll have a little bit of time to do that during the presentation. So Madam Clerk, will you please read the title?
Thank you. This is the fiscal year 2021-2022 proposed operating and capital improvement program budget study session. A presentation by Ms. Farrell Harrison, City Manager.
All right, Ms. Farrell Harrison, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Very happy to be with you this evening to talk about next year's budget. We have the whole team here assembled to answer questions that you may have related to the fiscal year budget that is starting on July 1 of 2021. This is now our fourth meeting deliberating about the budget, both the operating side and also the capital improvement program. As you know, the annual budget development process is an extensive and comprehensive one that we enjoy bringing to you and deliberating at length. In addition to the meetings that we've had, we've also met with the FIPAC, with PACs, with the Planning Commission, and so getting a lot of feedback on staff's recommendations. And so tonight, the purpose of our briefing to you for this evening is to go over some of the alternatives that you asked us to bring back for consideration, specifically around the use of the declared disaster reserves, reducing overall spending in general, and then looking at some alternatives with the headcount. And so before I turn it over to Carol, I did want to mention a couple of things. One is that the budget as it's being developed at the staff level and as it comes to you, it is a package. And so many of the projects, programs that are contained in the budget all rely on assumptions that are all tied together. And so as we bring a budget forward to you, we are bringing recommendations that we believe will result in the fruition of your council goals and priorities, the objectives that you have laid out. And so as we take the strategic planning retreat from January and we build into the next fiscal year, it is with your goals, your objectives, your policy direction in mind, and the resources that are needed to achieve that. And so as we go through this conversation tonight on alternatives, we're going to share with you some of the pros and cons of the various alternatives, what's gained, what could be lost, so that we have a full and transparent conversation. I do want to caution that it's very easy to look at a budget in terms of just pure dollars and cents. And really what we're looking for tonight from you is, what are the goals and objectives that you want to achieve next year, given the resources that we have and the resources that you feel comfortable funding. And again, what we've presented is a balanced package that allows for us to move forward with the objectives and goals that you've communicated to us, and this is how we would go about doing that. And so any of the alternatives that we talk about, our whole leadership team is here to answer questions about the implications of that, both in the short term and the long term. But hopefully we've given some additional options for you to consider, specifically as it relates to the reserves, and we have a balanced proposal to present to you. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Molina, our esteemed Finance Director.
Thank you, Lorianne. I just want to take a couple of minutes to thank staff. It takes a village to create a budget this size with so many moving pieces, especially coming out of the fiscal impacts of the pandemic. Even though we're still in COVID, we're starting to see some of the economic impacts that the not only pandemic had, but as we start seeing it come back. So we're starting to see a lot of economic reports that the economy in the United States is coming back from multiple sources in the range of 6 to 8.5%. We're very happy about that. It's more, we're very much more conservative in this budget. But that being said, let me start to share the screen so you can start deliberating on the proposals that are set forth with you tonight. Okay. Before you tonight is a 21-22 proposed operating and capital budget. As mentioned in our prior City Council study session and our public hearing last week, the theme to this year's budget is charting the path to economic recovery. Before you tonight, we will be addressing a couple of concerns that was brought up by Council at the June 1st, 2021 City Council meeting. The option to reduce the use of declared disaster reserves of about 3.2 million, a request to reduce the overall spending in the proposed budget, and as well as alternatives to our proposed headcount changes. As it matters to our reduction of the use of the declared disaster reserves. To bring back a bit of history, as you know, approximately a little bit over a year ago, the worldwide pandemic hit our shores. It was declared not only by the city of Costa Mesa, but from the country, the state, the county, and countries around the world. Since then, and due to the pandemic, the City Council authorized about $10.3 million to use the declared disaster reserves to help offset some of the revenue loss that the city started to see in its coffers almost immediately, specifically our sales tax. In 1920, in about April, which is just a couple weeks after the pandemic hit, we came before you and provided you with some cost containment measures to get ahead of the 1920 impacts. As I mentioned, the sales tax, TOT, those were two main categories of revenues that were immediately impacted in 1920. However, we were able to implement cost containment plan. And as you know, today in the 1920 budget, we did not have to use any reserves. We had about $160,000 in change in the positive. Earlier this year, in March 2021, President Biden signed into plan, the American Rescue Plan, which provided the city about $26.3 million of federal assistance. It is the first time in the country's history that every single local government, county, state, cities, tribal governments received federal relief for some of the economic impacts. These dollars are allowable for us to use until December 2024. And it is important to note that this Monday we did receive in our banking system half of this dollars. We were very excited to hear that we finally got those monies after just such an arduous process in making sure that we were set up. In the current 2021 budget projections, you will see as well that we are anticipating not have to dip into reserves yet again. In the 21-22 proposed budget that was presented to you prior to tonight, we were recommending to use about 3.2 million of the 10.3 that was previously authorized if needed in the next year. However, City Council requested some options to reduce that $3.2 million. We're coming back to you with the option of reducing the transfer from the general fund to the capital fund about $2.8 million. This $2.8 million will still ensure compliance with the capital asset needs municipal code, since that is exactly the debt payment amount that we do for the lease payment for the library, and as such is eligible. On the other side, in the capital fund, we are recommending to reduce the capital fund by the 1.5 million for the police shooting range. We're considering that in mid-year, and the transferring of citywide street improvement projects to the gas tax of about 0.9 million. And then lastly, in order to make up the difference between the 2.8 and 3.2, we're recommending about $400,000 in change transferred back in from the capital funds from some of the unused funds. As mentioned, the Lions Park project's debt service of the $2.8 million is eligible under our city's municipal code to be used against the 5% general fund revenue calculation as per the CAN. For our 21-22 proposed budget, our revised budget taking this into consideration, we're at $151.6 million in our revised 21-22 proposed budget for the general fund. Essentially, we're balanced at 151.6 without needing to use any of the reserves.
Carol, can we go back to that chart? Just I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if you could focus in on the proposed, the original proposed, and then the revised, and just walk through each line to make it, just to go through and show the clarity of what's changed. Please.
Okay, so in the estimated revenues line, in the proposed 21-22 budget that was brought before you prior to tonight, we were at 154.4 million. 144.6 is what we have identified as recurring revenues. 6.6 million is the use of the ARP funds for eligible cuts that we're taking in the 2021 adopted budget that we're bringing back into the 21-22 budget. And 3.2 million was the amount of money we were asking for use of the declared disaster reserve. In the 21-22 proposed, you'll see that the estimated revenues did not change. We essentially kept it flat to the original proposed since they're recurring. We are slightly increasing the transfer in for the $400,000 from the capital fund for a balance $151.6 million. So you can see here the change in the adopted from 2021 of 126.4 to 144.6, about 14.5%. And I'll go into more detail on the revenue side and some slides where I'm going to go ahead and provide you some more detail on some of the recurring revenues and what's in this number as well. On the operating side, as you can see, it slightly changed. It went from 145.4 to 154.4 to 151.6, essentially the reduction of the $2.8 million debt service payment. And as you can even see here, when you're looking on the revenue side, and we'll go back again, the 144.6 on the recurring revenue, we're coming back into 18-19 levels. However, in the 21-22 revised budget, we have included some Measure Q cannabis revenue projections. So as we go into the 21-22 proposed budget of the 151.6 million, it's about 11% increase of the 2021 adopted budget. And keep in mind, in the 2021 adopted budget, we made a lot of cuts, over $10 million, just to make sure we could balance against the revenue loss we were anticipating at that point in time. We have a differential of $2.8 million on the expense side as it relates to the CAN. We're also recognizing $400,000 from the capital fund. And we have essentially achieved not using the use of declared disaster reserves in the general fund, essentially balanced within itself. As such, at this point in time, there are no other cuts or revisions needed. Everything else on the expense side has been included in the proposed budget for the general fund. So what does our fund balance look like? In the 18-19 audited, we were at $53.3 million. In 19-20, as I mentioned before, we were able to implement significant amount of cost containment plans in place, and we actually increased our total fund balance to $53.5 million. We were estimating essentially to end this year essentially balanced without having to dip into reserves. And that's our projection at this point. Please keep in mind that the fiscal year has not yet closed. The auditors will be coming into the building shortly. It takes them a few months to start closing the books. We will have the CAFR final numbers in December, but we start really getting an idea around October, November as the auditors start to wrap up their work. So
just to take a pause here, that's part one of the presentation, which is basically eliminating any use of reserves. There's still the use of American Rescue Plan funds, but the use of reserves is taken care of. It's balanced fully without using any of the reserves. And as you can see, none of the fund balances would be touched. And at this point, all the other recommendations that are in the budget are fully financed and can remain intact.
Thank you, Lori-Ann. The second concern that council brought up last meeting was the head count. Now, keep in mind, as Lori-Ann just mentioned, at this point, the entire request that was originally brought forward has remained in these numbers. So a detailed head count overview of the full-time and part-time categories. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to the department directors, in this case, the police chief, so he can go through his requests as it came to the his conversion.
Thank you, Carol. Good evening, Mayor, City Council. So for the police department, the only request that we had in regards to personnel was elevating our part-time crime prevention specialist position to a full-time. This is in response to the city's goal of strengthening public safety and keeping the community safe, and the strategic objective to expand community policing. Prior to 2011, we had 2 full-time crime prevention specialist positions to address crime prevention, CPTED, and community outreach needs. 10 years later, we're now current. The importance and need for increased community outreach on crime prevention and community engagement has vastly increased. And we do a lot of this through educational programs and information on crime prevention that we put out on a regular basis through social media and different groups. Our neighborhood watch, which right now we currently have 32 groups in our city. The coordination and facilitation of various community meetings, the participation in community events, our volunteer program, our 2 Citizens Academy that we try to do when we're fully operational. And again, all this is under crime prevention. Our Teen Citizens Academy, an open house that we used to have, our National Night Out event, and our coffee events. So those are really the big ones that we always see, and these are the things that we want to accomplish and continue to expand our outreach. This also includes social media presence and backing up our public affairs manager who is involved with this. And all this is a very daunting task, but is a need as we try to expand our community policing engagement. And it's hard to accomplish it on the part-time crime prevention specialist. So that is my justification for requesting to elevate this position that we currently have to a full-time basis to meet those needs. And that is really all. That is all I have in regards to the position.
Thank you, Chief. I will now turn it over to the Fire Chief for the Fire and Rescue Department requests. Fire Chief.
Thanks, Carol and Lori-Ann and Mayor Stevens and City Council members. Thank you for the opportunity. And just for a clarifier, as we look at these positions, these are positions that came to play for all the departments after a vetting through the process of sitting down with the city manager and Carol and getting to this point. As far as the position for fire and rescue, as we look at this, we try to attach everything that we can to the city council priorities. Additionally, as you'll notice with the positions that we have identified, they're all related to established cost recovery programs. And again, I think we can all say that all the different elements of the budget are extremely important, but there's nothing more important than making sure that we have the right people taking care of business of the city for the citizens. And we cannot do it if we don't have the people in place. And so this element of how important the employees are and the different for all of the departments cannot be overstated. For us, as far as the EMS coordinator goes, it was established as a part-time position, and that was due to some of the prior cuts. We are the only city in the county that does not have someone dedicated to EMS. In particular, as we moved forward with the ambulance program, transportation program, that program was intended to help assist pay for that, although the responsibilities of our EMS coordinator are not limited to just the ambulance operator program. It's all of the emergency medical services training that takes place throughout the entirety of the department. And so there's an extraordinary amount of work that goes into that. And we've really leaned very heavy on individuals throughout our organization. We've decentralized a lot of it. There are elements that I own as the fire chief that really should be laid elsewhere. Our operations chief, members on the floor. And while part of that decentralized effort is important, the value and importance of having a balance with that is key. And quite frankly, especially after the past year and being on the front lines for our personnel, we've hit maximum capacity, and we've had some individuals that have had to step out of some of those administrative roles. But most importantly, I think the EMS coordinator is a key component to any type of fire rescue program. That, given the fact that about 70% of our calls are based on EMS. And so this ask of moving this to full-time is something that is absolutely necessary. And then as we go back to the cost recovery element, obviously the council priority is fiscal sustainability. It's also public safety. And as we look at what we've put into place, even with the challenges through COVID, 3.1 million year to date is what we have taken in for the ambulance program this year. Since the inception of the program, $9.4 million. So the ask for this, from my perspective, clearly is justified and extremely important. Second to that, we have an ask, and as I said, we had some other positions, but this is what we really fine-tuned it down to, our fire protection specialist positions. And again, for us, it was important to identify these as they met not only the city council priorities, but also were they able to sustain themselves. And quite frankly, they do in fiscal year 16-17. We came into the city council through study sessions. We met with the BIA and a number of other community groups to essentially go back and readdress some of the different funding needs, the cost recovery fees that we utilize for the department as it relates to inspections, and that was approved. And so those cost recovery, that increase from fiscal year 16-17 to the subsequent years, we went from $177,000 of cost recovery revenue to well over 500,000. And again, I think that's important because everything that we do, there's a cost involved as we talk about headcounts, but in terms of the back end and the cost recovery, extremely important. So as we speak to these fire protection specialists, the other element is they are currently at 0.75 in both cases, and we're looking just to elevate that to a full position. And in the interest of time, I'll just quickly go through the attachment to the city council priorities. But city council goal number one is to recruit and retain high quality staff. The 0.25 increase to this position will allow us to retain trained inspectors rather than losing qualified staff with experience to other agencies, and continuing to utilize existing staff time to train new employees. While I share that for this particular position, that statement goes for all of the positions that we're looking to elevate here. There's an impact to every single department. We partner with every department from finance to our partners in public safety, police department, development services, who's extremely hurting, IT, finance. Again, every element plays right into that. City council goal number two, achieve long-term fiscal sustainability. As I said, our fire construction and annual operational permit cost recoveries were increased in 16-17. And again, that jump from $177,000 to $559,000 is something that we were hoping to have put in previous budgets, but we stepped back and we've continued to do the same work, and we can't sustain it any longer. And I think where you'll find those funds, just so we had numbers, I know it came up in 5-pack, but in the current budget, it's on pages 38 and 39, where those are identified in terms of the cost recovery fees, just so we have a reference point. And again, moving on, city council goal 3, strengthen public safety and keep the community safe. I think that speaks for itself with what we said, but I do just want to identify that in the health and safety code section 13146.5, it requires that mandated inspections be carried out by full-time members of the fire department. What we've done to hit gaps along the way is to utilize part-time employees and our interns. And by legal mandate, we're not able to do that. And so again, it's alleviating some of that additional risk involved in liability to the city. And then finally, just City Council goal number 5, diversify, stabilize, and increase housing to reflect community needs. The new development of construction will be slowed if we do not have the inspectors to cover the inspection workload. These additional staff time will provide surge coverage inspections as the workload and permit volume increases. And as I shared, the cost has been completely offset by the cost recovery fees. So again, the ask for the fire and rescue department is incremental jump from 0.75 to 1 full-time position for the fire protection specialist and the EMS coordinator. Again, all related. And again, the last element, as I share, is why I've shared the fire and rescue department. Each one of the criteria I've outlaid really aligns with every department as we move forward, and we do rely on each other. And then finally, I just want to thank Lorianne and Carol for their leadership with this budget, because I think it goes unsaid, and while there's a great appreciation, what I've seen in the course of the past 2 years and what they have been able to do in looking forward and leaning into the challenges that have been placed on us, they've done an exceptional job. So again, I appreciate the time, and I will remain available for any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief. I will now turn it over to Steve Ely, the IT Director. Steve? Steve, you're on mute.
Good evening, Mayor and members, council members. What you see here is kind of what's derived from City Council's approval of the ITSP budget back in February 2020. Along with that budget, that ITSP, the strategic plan, came a number of projects that absolutely the city needs. We have so many old systems, and this is kind of like a broken record, right? You've heard it all before. But attached with those projects, we need the staff. And so what you see here is a programmer analyst that we need for database support and departmental applications. A network administrator. One of the projects, that we have on our plan is to introduce Office 365. It's a way for us to save funds on licensing and also add tools to the city's network. The other side of this is the IT manager. With the amount of projects, CAD RMS, the current LMS that's being installed right now, and then the upcoming ERP, we have so many projects and we just don't have the staff to maintain it. This project manager will manage the plan, organization, and accountability to achieve the Costa Mesa's information technology goals. The position will deal with the challenges of independent integrations, rapid technology upgrades, version changes throughout the timeline of all of our projects. Also responsible for the planning, organizing, and allocating of resourcing, budgeting, and also the successful execution of organization-specific IT goals. Some of our projects, the hardware installations, the network upgrades, the cloud computing, and our virtualization rollouts that we're planning on, our ERP implementation and the databases. Right now, we don't have the staff to make sure that we can meet our technology goals going forward. These projects will linger. They're going to be haphazard. This management position will be able to manage and control that from that perspective. And so what we ask is that the council take into consideration these changes for the IT department and our strategic plan going forward. Thank you for your time. I'll have any questions that you would like to ask.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over now to our Department Director, Jennifer Lee, on Development Services requests.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. For Development Services, our request for this budget is for the conversion of 3 part-time positions to full-time in both the planning and building divisions, for a total of 3 part-time to full-time positions. Each year in planning and building, our staff respond to, on average, over 70,000 customer requests per year at our public counter. The requested positions, specifically the building technician, building plan checker, and a planner, are in many cases the face of the city for residents and businesses in Costa Mesa as they respond to customer requests for permits and plan checks at our public-facing customer service counter. Due to a steady increase in workload, both due to customer requests and high priorities by our city council, our workload has increased steadily over the past several years, and that, coupled with low staffing levels, has led the department to experience in the last several years an increased backlog in permits and also longer response times for our customers. Increasingly, we're not able to meet our customers' expectations in terms of response times and also issuing their permits and plan checks as they would expect. Our request to convert the part-time to full-time positions really stems from that desire to be able to provide our customers with a good response time to meet their expectations and to match appropriate staff resources with workload levels. In addition to responding to workload, recruiting and retaining staff in these part-time positions has really become a challenge in the past few years. These positions, they are professional level positions, and in most cases, they require a 4-year college degree. And in the case of plan check staff, for example, they're typically a licensed engineer. So professionals in the workplace today with those qualifications, they are not seeking part-time work, they're seeking full-time work. So even if we are able to recruit for those positions, those part-time staff typically leave very quickly as soon as they're able to find full-time work. This has a significant effect on our department productivity, both in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, institutional memory, and really affects our recruiting and retention ability for staff. For those reasons, we are requesting the conversion of 3 part-time positions to full-time as part of this budget. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Jennifer. I will now turn it over to Public Service Director Raja Sadaraman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. It's not easy asking for new positions, I know, at any time. Our city manager, Royan Harrison, as well as Carol Molina have put in a lot of effort in this one, and we deliberated quite a bit on what's needed. And what we are requesting as in the Public Service Department is after all those deliberations and what we feel are the minimum requirements that we need to adequately staff and function. I'll go in kind of the order that's presented here. The first one that you're seeing is actually it's downgrading a position, so it's actually saving money to the city. We're going down from executive secretary to an office specialist. The next one is engineering technician 2, requesting reclassification from part-time to full-time. This has been requested before, also considered before, but we didn't get funding the last time around. We have seen a significant increase in development permits, and that require staff support both for review as well as permit assistance. A lot of times we have to spend time with community members and business people in preparing the permit applications. And the backlogs of the permit have resulted in numerous complaints. And unfortunately, some of you have heard from our business community as well as residents that it's taking a long time to get permits processed in the city. And we need to address that. And also we need field support on various capital projects. This includes surveying, design, and construction support. So this position will assist in both of these areas. Maintenance assistant, this is again a request to reclassify a part-time to full-time. The city's facility infrastructure, many of the fire stations, even this building that we are in right now, they're all aging. It needs a lot more maintenance support than we expect. In addition, we are adding new facilities such as we're bringing back online the neighborhood community center. We have the new library and also the bridge shelter. So in order to address these growing maintenance needs, we are requesting that the part-time maintenance staff be converted to full-time. The next is a new position. It's an active transportation coordinator. Over the past 5 years, we have seen a significant increase focus in active transportation. Several new projects and programs were added to address ATP issues in the city, and we welcome all these this initiative. We have put a lot of effort into that, and we want to continue doing that. But it's taking a toll on staffing here. In order to meet your priorities as well as the bikeway and walkability committee's expectations, we are proposing a new active transportation coordinator position. This is a high-level position with expertise in complete streets and active transportation. And what's happening is right now, what we're seeing is the role of active transportation is getting into every single capital project that we have. We are addressing even on street rehabilitation projects. We are looking for complete street elements. So I think it's in order to meet the requirements, we are requesting this position. The next is also a new position of a senior management analyst. Our department right now has 72 full-time staff, and with ongoing and proposed projects, it's $60 million in capital improvements. And we have 26 million in operating funds. And we have one management analyst to provide support for all functions. So we need additional support to manage the operating and capital funds, to track progress of projects, and to help provide periodic updates to the community and to provide grant administration and support. We have seen, there is request for online project status on various projects. We have seen that, we received that request from the community as well as from the council. And adding a senior management analyst will help towards meeting that request. Finally, associate engineer. This is funded not from general funds. It is proposed for funding from Measure M2 funding. So as you know, from the current list of CIPs, we are proposing 47 new projects with a budget of almost $25 million. And we are carrying over 68 projects from prior fiscal years with a budget of $35 million. And right now, our project managers are taking on multiple projects. They have, they're handling too many projects and falling behind on some. That's why you see so many of these projects that are ongoing, because we can't get to everything. So adding this associate engineer will help in providing this support. We tried, and we are doing that. We tried funding this with outside consultants. We bring in outside consultants to help us. But what we are finding is staff still needs to provide support to this consultant because of to address our local needs, to help them understand our way of doing projects. So even though we bring in outside consultant, we still have to invest a lot of our time. So that's why having a full-time associate engineer will provide an additional project manager support for various projects. So those are the various positions that we are requesting, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have. Carol?
Thank you, Raja. I will now move forward to the Parks and Recreation Department, Director Jason Minter.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Carol. For Parks and Community Services, the two different positions that we're talking about, one is the consolidation of some part-time positions into a full-time maintenance worker, primarily for Fairview Park. This position will have responsibilities at the Bart Park and the skate park, but that would be a small portion of their overall responsibilities. As we continue to learn more about Fairview Park, the maintenance challenges that are out there will be a huge benefit to have a full-time maintenance worker instead of the part-timer that we have now. The second position is the arts specialist. This position was identified in the Arts and Culture Master Plan that Council approved back in March of this year. I think it's critical to the development of arts and arts-related programming that we have this position in place, not only to facilitate our committee and the Potential Arts Commission, but also engage the community and the different advocate groups that we have to continue to push Costa Mesa as being the city of the arts. And those are my two positions. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Jason. I will now move it on to the City Manager's department. City Manager Farrell Harrison.
Thank you. I had to find my unmute button. So in the city manager's department, we're eliminating certain positions in order to reclassify into a more appropriate position. So you'll see, and if you haven't noticed the nomenclature, we've tried to group these together so that if there is a position that's being eliminated and another position coming in its place, you could see that connection. So in this case, a human resources analyst is being downgraded to a human resources technician at a lower cost for a savings of about $14,000. That's 1A and B combined. The second recommendation is the human resources office specialist 2 to be converted to a human resources secretary. There's a slight increase in that cost, but we need that position in order to achieve the work of the human resources department, which of course provides support for all departments throughout the city and is a very small but very ferocious team. They do a lot of great work and are basically responsible for everything related to HR. It's all of our onboarding, recruitment, our hiring, our retention, general liability, workers' compensation, which is all within our risk management negotiations of our contracts, and working very closely with payroll as well to make sure that all of those payroll adjustments are made on a timely basis in concert with Carol's staff. So you can imagine it's quite a lot of work. The third proposal is to convert an office specialist 2, which is part-time, to full-time. And this is in our central services area, very closely aligned with doing the work of the city clerk and getting our agenda packets to you on a timely basis. The next recommendation is administrative secretary, to eliminate that position. Instead, an office specialist, much like similar action that Raj is taking in one of his budget recommendations, just to better suit our needs. And then also a management, the administrative secretary and office specialists are actually those are both being eliminated. So we're eliminating 2 positions so that we can fund a management analyst, and that's for our city clerk. And so in that case, 2 part-time positions go away in order to allow for a management analyst for a higher level capacity work. And then finally, the assistant city manager position. I have had some conversations with some of you offline about the need for additional citywide oversight and management for our city. I know that at one point we did have an assistant city manager. Throughout the years, I believe because of the recession and as some people moved on from the city, that position was eliminated. With a full service city that is involved with as many initiatives, special projects, and of course there's always the day-to-day. That's something that we believe that we need in order to have the bandwidth to better do project management, provide that citywide oversight administration, but also quite frankly to help achieve the goals that you've outlined that you'd like for us to achieve, and the new special projects and initiatives that are near and dear to your hearts that you'd like for us to pursue as we move forward and as we take Costa Mesa to the next level. We need that additional resource, that additional capacity just to be able to do that as well and provide the oversight, administration, and management of all of the city's departments. And so this pretty much rounds out what's in the budget today. So what you've heard right now from all the department heads, these are the recommendations that are actually contained in the budget. And we have addressed the disaster reserve concern that you had, and these positions are still affordable in just this format as we've described. Some positions go away, others would come on, some part-times are eliminated, some new positions are added. But This proposal, as each department head has gone through it, is what's contained in the budget, and is something that we believe that we can afford. You did ask for options to be presented in lieu of this, or alternatives to be considered. If you didn't feel comfortable going forward with all of these recommendations, which is the next part of the presentation, we'll share some alternatives. But as has been shared with all of the directors, this is what we believe we need to have in the budget in order to achieve the goals that you've lined out for us. And so we're hoping that you'll strongly consider keeping these recommendations intact. But I'll turn it over now to Carol for a discussion of alternatives.
Thank you, Lorianne. I did want to share with you just the conversions piece alone outside the full-time employee add-ons. You're looking at some very minor realignments in each of the departments. You'll see a city manager's office going down by 0.13, parks 0.06, police half, fire and rescue 1, development services department 1, and public services half, for about 2.93 FTE increase through all of the different conversions citywide for about $400,000. So as you can tell here, even though it may seem quite a bit, when you start looking at the totals, it's really not too much.
And these are all the part-time to full-time conversions that we all just discussed with you.
Yes. And in an effort to address all of the decrease of the overall headcount, we wanted to bring forth to you what the total, the conversions plus the full-time employee requests, total of the 9.94 by department. So you can see what each of the departments are requesting and the impact to the budget as it is currently contained in the proposed budget. As you can see here, you'll see how our full-time equivalent does go up. However, we are taking down some part-time positions for a net increase of about 9.9 positions. Even with this increase on the full-time employee count, we still are 13% less than we were before the Great Recession hit. And as you can tell here, we really have taken drastic cuts throughout the last few years and slowly started to make our way back into what we were experiencing before the Great Recession. Alternative number one is if none of these occurred. If all of the 9.9 positions were not approved, it would definitely reduce the proposed budget by about $1.6 million. However, by taking that action, there is a range of challenges that the city departments would be facing. There would be an excess number of vacancies due to our ongoing recruitment and retention issues. We will continue to delay our permanent and plan check processing, and our backlog has only been increasing from 2 to 4 months. We will continue to receive ongoing complaints from residents and businesses regarding the delays in our backlog. We will have delays in implementing city council priorities. We also have had some complaints on our sporadic availability due to our schedules and, in essence, having so many part-timers in some of these specialized categories. We continue to experience a high turnover on our part-time positions because, as mentioned earlier, as soon as they're able to, they will leave for full-time employment elsewhere, and that's happening continually with our part-timers. There is a lack of succession planning. There isn't succession planning, sufficient positions available to have succession planning in the departments. We're also losing key institutional knowledge because of the high turnover. We're experiencing delays in our CIP project implementation. We also don't have sufficient staffing to address any grant or other funding opportunities. And we have insufficient staff to achieve our day-to-day workloads and our special projects or initiatives. I just wanted to bring to your attention, as a city government, our one and only priority is service. We do not produce products. We produce service, and we can only provide service to our residents through staff. Our alternative number 2 is only to identify a couple of key full-time positions. So bringing on 4 full-timers, essentially saving almost $800,000. However, we will still continue some of those challenges I just mentioned because this will only address just a couple of departments. It will not address the public safety, does not address the issues currently being experiencing in all of the departments from public services to development services to fire and police department. And our alternative number 3, it would be just to fund all of the full-time requests, none of the conversions. As you can see here, again, we would be only addressing certain departments. We would still be experiencing certain significant backlog issues. We're not addressing any of our public safety concerns. And again, it would just only help in certain areas. And alternative number 4, we fund all of the requests except certain categories. We don't fund the art specialist position because essentially it was in year 2 of the plan. We do not address the IT strategic planning positions. However, we bring on the IT manager. We don't address one of the fire protection specialists. And we do not bring forward the senior management analyst that's needed in the public services department or the associate engineer. So we would save about $500,000. However, you still have some issues in other departments that would not be satisfied. And in this next slide, as we go moving forward, I want to address as well some social equity. Budgeting through our social equity lens. The city is committed to our improved quality of life and to its residents for equity through an inclusive budgetary process to support programs and services to address all of our community needs. We recognize the value of our community partners and we support their mission by working collaboratively with programs and services. We're also amassing resources to invest in new programs to better meet the community needs. We'll prioritize social equity in all areas of the city, and we'll continue this through funding in the future, different areas we're trying to create. To start to address our 21-22 proposed general fund revenue estimates, keep in mind this would be funding all of the positions. Wanted to bring forth to you our revenue estimates. Going back to 1819, before COVID hit, as you can see, our property tax started at $42.9 million in 1819. We're projecting $47.3 million by the close of this fiscal year, with the $49.5 million in the next year, essentially a 5% increase from 2021. I am sure through all of the articles and information that's out there on real estate, property tax is one thing that was not impacted by pandemic. It's almost the other way around. People really invested in their homes, took advantage of being in their homes and upgraded them. There's a lot of construction going on. We start seeing those in those numbers. And talking with HDL and the county, we're continuing to see that into the next year. Our sales tax, we are anticipating it start coming back. We see in 2021, we're definitely close to 60 million. We're essentially a 2.5% increase year over year, where the economists are saying we're going to be experiencing a larger percentage in this category. You start seeing the job market slowly coming back. There's a lot of stimulus money out there. There's a lot of people starting to spend their stimulus money, getting more comfortable with the economy. The stock market's coming back. So we very comfortable with this sales tax estimate. Our TOT, it's going to take a little bit of time for the hotel industry to come back, especially because of the business, but we're still anticipating a comeback. Not so much the business related travel, but definitely the travel by families and so forth. That's coming back. And talking to Travel Costa Mesa, they're seeing 85% occupancy through the summer for specifically those families. They want to get out. People are wanting to start to travel. They were cooped up for a year. We're starting to see some of these numbers starting to come back. Not till the pre-pandemic levels, but definitely higher than we experienced in 1920. And as you can see in our miscellaneous revenues category, we're only anticipating a 2% increase, or $500,000 more than what we have or projecting in the current fiscal year. But when we go back to the prior years, it's still 7% less than what we would before the pandemic. So overall, just on our recurring revenues, we're anticipating about 4% increase year over year. As you can tell here, these are very conservative numbers. The economists are out there, they're saying between 5.6 to 8.6% is what they're anticipating. Everywhere from Forbes, we're seeing it everywhere saying solid on the low end, about 5% increase. We're very conservative here and 4% increase year over year, just on our recurring revenues alone. Keep in mind too that we have our cannabis. So we're anticipating about $3 million in cannabis between the retail tax portion and some of the permit fees that were approved. We're also recommending $7 million of the ARP money. So this was the dollars that are eligible for the cuts that we took in 2021. This is specifically what the ARP is designed to be, for those revenue areas that were reduced, cuts that were taken due to the pandemic. We're allowed to use ARP funds for that, for a total of $151.6 million in our general fund, essentially a 10% increase over our 1920 revenues, which, keep in mind, in that last quarter really took a hit. In our infrastructure, facilities, equipment, and technology budget, wanted to bring back to your attention the discussion of the equipment replacement fund. We've brought forth this discussion a couple of times already, where the equipment replacement fund needs to be addressed. We do want to come back in the fall for a 5-year plan to address this. However, we do want City Council authority to be able to transfer about $2.2 million from our reserves and designated fund balance to immediately start helping this fund. For our next steps. Next Tuesday, the June 15th public hearing will be before you in the fall. We anticipate coming back with a long-term strategic plan for the equipment replacement fund, as well as for the general fund, as soon as we get those first quarter results. Before you right here is the budget calendar. As you can see, we started these discussions May 10th, approximately a month ago, with the Planning Commission. We've been to the City Council, to FIPAC, to the Parks, Arts, and Community Services Commission. This is, again, we're back to Council tonight. We were in Council last week, and we anticipate coming back to you next week. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Sorry, it took me a little time to get off of mute. So shall we hear from the public first, or questions from council? Why don't we hear from the public first? Madam Clerk, do we have anybody who wishes from the public that wishes to speak at this time? Remember, everyone, it's 2 minutes to speak, and let's give them a 30-second warning.
Thank you,
Anybody
Mr. Mayor. Yes, our first speaker will be Hank Castanetti.
Hi, good evening, Council. I'd like to comment tonight in support of Director Jason Minter's proposal for staff in the PACS department. I would also like to specifically support his proposal to retain a full-time maintenance employee for Fairview Park. That is an important asset for the city, and moving an employee from part-time to full-time is absolutely essential. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let's see, next, do we have, oh, here.
Kim
I'm sorry.
Hendricks, please.
Kim Hendricks.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. And I would also like to say that Fairview Park Alliance supports a full-time employee maintenance at Fairview Park for improved quality of life that you were talking about. Fairview Park is the gem of Costa Mesa for that decompression. I also would like to please suggest that you give it a subheading under parks, because it really can't be considered in the same way that the other parks are considered because of the natural resources and archaeological resources that are there. They are not there in any other park north of San Diego along the coast. All other places have been destroyed. Vernal pools that we have here in Costa Mesa are home to endangered plants and animals. It's a stopover for migrating birds who are exhausted and need a place to eat. And I'm sure you all heard about what happened in Bolsa Chica with the drones and the destruction of the 3,000. And I think really during this pandemic, it has caused a lot of us to dig deeper into causes and see that viruses happen with unhealthy ecosystems. And viruses come from, most viruses come from animals, the swine flu, smallpox. I think it's very important that we start to look at cause and effect and give all our community members that quality of life that we really want and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else with their hands up.
Mr. Mayor, we have no further speakers.
Okay, in that case, I'll close the public comment. And so then council members, just raise your hand and I'll give you the floor, and then you can ask all the questions you want or make all the comments you want. And then let's make sure everybody gets a chance to speak once, and then we'll go around for seconds if anybody wants to talk more. So who wants to go first? Okay, I saw Councilmember Chavez, and then next I saw Mayor Pro Tem Mar. So let's do it in that order.
Thank you, Mayor Stevens, and thank you everyone once again for joining us today. You know, budgets are basically where we just deliberate our priorities, and that's essentially what we're going to be doing today and next week. I have a really quick question for staff. Obviously, we're going to be facing potentially some sort of deciding which positions we think are the most fit. So I just want to begin with this simple question. Not saying I lean this way, but I just want to begin here. Let's say we fund every position. Hypothetically speaking, what are the actual chances we fill every position?
I'll respond to that. And so I think as we go through the process of doing the recruitment and the hiring and the retention, by the end of the year, I would anticipate that all of the positions will be filled. Of course, there'll be a trickling in throughout the year. And so not every position will be filled for the entire year, but it would be our goal to hit the ground running and try to get these filled as soon as possible. Part of the challenge that we have, though, to be honest, is we have trouble filling our positions because we don't have enough staff to help with the day-to-day workload to get the positions filled. And so there's a lot of turnover that happens, especially on the part-time side. So we gain ground and then we lose ground. So I'm hoping that with some of these structural changes from part-time to full-time, we'll stop losing ground and we'll be able to actually get folks on board. But our vacancy our vacancy factor right now is about anywhere from 10 to 15%. So I'd say, 85, 90% chance or funding for the year once they're brought on. In terms of what our vacancy factor is, it's about 10 to 15% of our positions are vacant at any point in time.
So, and thank you for mentioning that rate, because that's actually where I was kind of going with my question. Are we factoring in that 10 to 50% rate when we're saying we're going to hire all these people, or are we just assuming they're hired day one of the new budget?
So, Councilmember Chavez, we do budget starting July 1. We really don't know how quickly we'll be able to get them on board, but we do assume immediate funding for those positions, and we do fund at mid-range.
Okay, so essentially, what I'm hearing is we're not kind of anticipating in our budget, at least. Let's say someone gets hired 6 months in December. So potentially we could have some savings as we try to find people to be hired. Is that correct?
So we have a $4 million negative plug, if you will. That's our citywide attrition factor. That's $4 million. So we're assuming every year that we'll have 4 million or so in savings. We don't attach it to a specific position. Right now it's contained in certain departments, but we manage it and finance manages it citywide so that we're not telling departments don't hire. Unfortunately, most of it is in the police department's budget, but the chief knows that he has authority to hire as long as citywide we achieve the 4 million in savings. So that's the number that's in the budget. So it would be for any positions that are vacant at any point in time. And I think the last time we checked, it was about an 8% vacancy factor. So that's where we want to be. We don't want to be, for a city our size, to be at about 10, 15% vacancy factor is not good.
And Councilmember Chavez, if I could just add on as well, I think the conversion piece is so extraordinarily important because for all of the departments, because that's an immediate hit. And as Lorianne said, that's an immediate opportunity to build all the departments. And again, whether it's fire, we have positions, or whether I look at development services, those are key positions. And we are, from the succession planning component and losing people, we're losing people because of that. And so just to keep that in consideration as well, the conversion piece is an immediate.
Thank you, Chief Stefano. I actually was about to mention my suggestions and you kind of hit it on the head. I think I personally want to have a more conservative, balanced budget. I think it's our duty as a resident Costa Mesa to make sure we're preparing ourselves for future disasters. The difficulty in that lies that we're obviously going to not be funding every service possible. However, luckily with my job with the County of Orange, I look at a lot of budgets for different cities, and I'm able to compare and contrast what different cities are doing. And that's something I think that helped us a lot this pandemic, was that we, as a general mode of thinking, are pretty cautious and not overly zealous on spending. So just to quickly list down my 3 priorities, if worst comes to worst, these are the 3 things I think we should hire. I think we can hit them through conversions, but just to put it for the public, I think public safety is always a key thing we do. So that's, with fire and police, that's something that I really want to focus us on. I think IT is incredibly important, not only for the well-being of our city, but it's also really important because as we see things happen nationwide, IT attacks are becoming more and more prominent. So we want to be as safe as possible at all times. And lastly, I really think we should be focusing on developmental services. I've been getting a lot of emails and calls from folks who are having a hard time with the department. And thank you, Ms. Lee, for all you do, because I know you guys are working as best you can. And I truly appreciate you, and I just want to give you more help. So those are my 3 if worst comes to worst. I'm really interested in hearing what my other members of council are going to say, and members of the public are going to say, because ultimately this is our budget, but those are my general thoughts. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Excellent. So Mayor Pro Tem Mar, you're next, and then we'll go to Councilmember Harlan.
Okay, I don't know where to start. I can't do this for another couple of years. I can't come back to council and hear about how much stuff we can't do, how many things are failing, how many people we lose on a regular basis, how many times we have to reinvent the wheel. I can't listen. This is demoralizing and depressing and frustrating, and we need to fix these things. I cannot just keep kicking the can down the road and hope that maybe by doing nothing, we're suddenly gonna like be a more successful city and bring in more. That is not how this works. We have to fix it. We have to fix the broken systems in order for us to do better as a city. And I feel like I'm just gonna start ranting at every single one of these meetings. So I'm glad we don't have a fourth study session, but like, we cannot go another year and hear the same thing about systems being broken and equipment not working and not having enough staff, like, and it being the only ones in the county that don't have an EMS coordinator. I think, I guess I am begging my colleagues up here to do the right thing and to move forward with stopping the bleeding, fixing when we have an opportunity to do so. Yes, I absolutely agree. Like it sounds bad politically that we're going to use disaster money. We had a disaster. It is okay to use that money. It is okay to use that money to move forward successfully as a city. I don't know. I don't know how we do this going forward, right? I never want to have another study session like this where every department head has to get up and say how much they're strapped, how much they are hurting, how much they need people. And this is, we can't keep doing this. So I don't know what everybody else sort of planned on saying tonight, and I didn't necessarily plan on saying anything because I was pretty happy with what's been presented the last couple of sessions. But this is not sustainable to continue operating how we are operating right now. So I sincerely hope that we can find some way to move forward, to do the right thing this budget cycle and be able to be back on firmer ground next time around. Thank you.
Excellent, passionate comments. Councilmember Harlan.
Thank you, John. I'm not sure how to follow that up. I certainly wasn't expecting that from Mayor Pro Tem Mar, but I appreciate that perspective and I value it. Just a few general comments. I had said it, I don't know if it's a study session previously, but I thought that the budget as presented then was a good balance between some fiscal restraint and giving us some flexibility to do all the things that we want to do. And I think are things that the community has said are important. So I am inclined to try and be a little bit more, I want to be cautious, but at the same time, I recognize that, we need to kind of fix the structural problems that we have here. So to that extent, if we need to use disaster reserves, and we've already, the prior council had made that determination, I think that may be appropriate in this case as a one-time only. And I think that to me is sort of the issue. Is this a one-time only measure that we're going to take? Or if, as Mayor Pro Tem Mar had indicated, are we going to be faced with the same situation year after year? So I kind of want to put it back on staff too, to say, how do we fix things structurally? And Ms. Farrell-Harrison, one question that I'd like to at least get a little bit more clarification on is, if we have a deputy city manager, and I'm all in favor of having more high-level management because I know it's needed. What is the kind of specific scope and direction? And for my purposes, if, as we've been talking about for a long time, economic development, trying to increase our balance sheet on the revenue side, if that's going to be a potential focus of that particular position.
Thank you, Councilmember Harlan. Yes, and so I think as we look at how we're evolving and the initiatives that we want to undertake, and we have heard from the council repeatedly that we need to be more assertive about our economic development activities. Well, we have one, if we can even say it's one, it's probably like a half of a person dedicated to economic development initiatives. And, we just kind of fit it in as we can. And so the vision that I have for this assistant city manager position is to be able to concentrate on specific areas that currently I'm overseeing as Susan takes care of homelessness, our HR department, our city clerk's office works on development issues, housing, and homelessness, obviously. So I handle police, fire, finance, and I would keep those. And so those are ones that are very near and dear. They're also the ones that have the highest risk. So I feel that falls in my lap, and I will gladly continue to oversee those departments. And so the assistant city manager would be involved in the social equity arena, in managing public services, working more with the active transportation initiatives, the bike and walkability committee, and things of that nature. And then also parks right now is with Susan Price. So that could remain there, but development services, the other aspects of development services could be parceled out to that assistant city manager as well, along with our information technology. So one of the things that I'll share with you is I currently oversee information technology. I barely ever can see Steve. And so as I put out fires, we barely can connect. We're connecting on the phone on my way home, on the way into work. Sometimes I have a working lunch just about every day because that's the only time I can fit things in. I need someone to help Steve manage these major projects. We need a cybersecurity platform. We need to get these large implementations done. He needs to have access to someone who can give him the resources to get this done. Sometimes we need additional funding. Sometimes we need additional staff. We may need a change order. It's tough for Susan and I to manage the scope and the breadth and depth of everything that we have on our plates. And then of course, disaster management is something that the assistant city manager could assist with as well. And so of course it would depend on the individual skills and abilities, and we could reassess this and sit down and between Susan, myself, and whoever takes the position to do it in a way that really maximizes. But I can tell you that what we have right now is not working.
And Councilmember Harlan, I hate to jump in, but I just forgot
No,
one.
go ahead.
Because one area that I've seen have happened, I've never seen it before, but human resources. Susan has a piece of that. Lorianne has a piece of that. It's the first time I've ever seen a city manager have to step into and be a part of the actual negotiation process. And again, every department head is so talented, but we all wear multiple hats. But to see the city manager have to step in and sit in the negotiations, I mean, it's just a great visual of the added workload that the city manager's office has between Susan and Lorianne. So appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Chief, for that comment. I mean, we look at these budgets and we see positions, and it's hard for us, I think, as the policymakers to figure out what is particularly important in each one. And here's the first time we're actually getting some limited scope of each job. Your departments better than we do, but all of these could seem essential. And that's kind of the sense I'm getting from Mayor Pro Tem Mar on this, is that, these are kind of the bare minimum. This isn't extra. And so I guess a question for the department heads too, is that on what are identified in that last piece of the report as key positions, are those really key positions, or is it just these are the new positions that we think are the most important, and the others are just slightly below that? I guess I'm trying to get at, how are we really prioritizing these?
I have a confession, Councilmember Harlan. I put those together myself, trying to brainstorm on what we, not even what's the bare minimum, a little bit of what you might want so that we get a little bit of what we might want. And I got chewed out by my department heads just before this call. And so if you ask them, those are not the key positions. That's why I put them in quotes. And so I think the key positions are the ones, quite frankly, that we brought forward in the budget. There were more asks than these. This is after a long vetting, all of us as a team looking at, well, what's the point of changing part-time positions in development services, but not addressing it in Raja's area? It's the same applicant. The applicant's gonna go from one department to another, and they're gonna have the same issue now somewhere else. We're still not ahead. And so what you have is a suite. It's a suite of funding and services and staffing that all complements each other to get the work done that we believe we need to get done over the next 12 months. And so in that sense, they're all key positions. That option is one that has 2 positions that are council priorities, and then a couple more. But quite frankly, that's a longer list. The key positions are really a much longer list.
Well, that's kind of what I figured. So I appreciate you confirming that. There's a question I should have asked up front, and it's more just for the public's benefit, but looking at all of those numbers, we're talking about the fully burdened cost of those positions, correct, Ms. Molina?
Yes, it is correct. That's the fully burdened cost for the positions.
Okay. I will yield my time at the moment. If we've got time later, Mayor Stevens, I might have another comment or two. Thank you.
You got it. Okay, next is Councilmember Reynolds.
Sorry. Thank you. I had a few questions, more sort of curiosities into how we got sort of where we are in terms of being so understaffed. I know everyone has sort of their own story for that. One thing I was surprised about with this report was the number of part-time positions that we had. And it makes a lot of sense, the challenges with the part-time positions, especially with the turnover and the loss of institutional knowledge that comes with that and sort of the sporadic availability. I'm just curious, why do we have so many part-time positions? I know a lot of our directors here are new as well, but what is the reason for having those?
Well,
I guess
I
Councilmember
can tell
Reynolds.
you some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll give you when I came in, each department had really been cut out considerably. And this is going back right after the Great Recession. And so the fill back was to fill back with part-time positions, and that hesitation to take it all the way to full-time positions. And that's where it has just continued to stay. And it's the normalization of deviation, lack of a better way to put it, quite frankly.
Yes, Councilmember Reynolds, that's exactly as Chief Safana mentioned. So back in 2008, 2009, when we started looking at positions, we cut quite a bit in every department, and some we outsourced, but several positions were cut, and we started bringing them back. We could not bring them back, so many positions were not filled, and we brought them as part-time. So the engineering technician is part-time, same way. Associate engineer was actually a funded position that got eliminated altogether. The maintenance assistant, same way. You can see in our maintenance department, we have several part-time positions still. But that's how we were bringing back rather than having a full-time and going through that process.
If I could speak real fast, again, it seemed that was the authorization. You could get a part-time person and you get multiple part-time positions just to avoid doing a full-time. So at one point I knew that we were able to have 3 park rangers part-time opposed to getting the one, so we have a constant schedule. Those are just examples, but that was kind of the strategy back in the day to rebuild, was all focused on part-time that we could get and work with.
And Councilmember Reynolds, I
Yeah.
think development services, in particular, the positions that we're requesting, all of those were previously full-time positions. They were cut to part-time. They've been part-time ever since, and we've had consistent turnover in those positions just about every year. So we're really looking for a strategy here, a longer-term strategy to be able to assist our customers more consistently.
Yeah. I appreciate that. If any other department heads want to share, but it seems like a pretty similar story. And I want to actually thank Mayor Pro Tem Mar for her rant at the last meeting that we had, and I encourage it because it sort of shook me out of the sort of COVID year to remember some of our conversations and in our first budget cycle, and I think maybe first or second planning retreat where we got our first look sort of under the covers at more than a decade, in some cases decades of underinvestment in so many systems and underinvestment in our staffing. And Ms. Molina, the slide you shared on the challenges that we would likely or definitely continue to face without these staffing improvements,
took me through a little down memory lane of all the things that we, we're dealing with even before COVID. And I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Mar that we got to fix those things if we want to sort of even get back to status quo, and especially if we want to start really investing in our city and innovating. And I think we all agree. Mayor Stevens, I know you like to say you've got your sort of laundry list of items of why Costa Mesa is the best city in the world, and I love hearing that list. And we really are a truly unique city in a very wealthy county, and we have an opportunity, if not obligation, I think, to invest in a lot of those economic growth initiatives. I was going down the list thinking like what here might not be critical, and I can't pick one item that I think is not critical in terms of all of the things we need to fix, and all of the things that we really need to invest in or will benefit significantly from investing in. So I mean, the public services and the IT stuff is obvious. In the police department, the sort of community relations coordinator, absolutely critical in the discussions that we're having and the emphasis we want to place on community relations, the importance of that in our sort of social equity conversations as well. Even the arts specialist and the ATP coordinator, Mr. Satharaman, I think you made a really good point that, ATP is sort of taking a different role. Not just because of my personal interest in it, but the new laws around complete streets and our city goals around complete streets. ATP is no longer this special project on the side. It really needs to be an integrated part of every road project that we're looking at now. I know Councilmember Harlan knows this on the bike committee with me. There's a strong connection between ATP and walkable, bikeable cities with economic growth and development opportunity. There's going to be some key sort of integration aspects of that with our housing plans. How do we meet our housing goals without doubling traffic in the city? Those are really important considerations as well. On the arts specialist piece, I mean, that was the first thing I think of in terms of how are we meeting our city's mission statement on the sort of vibrant city and inclusive city. I think the arts and culture specialist is a critical part of that. And I don't know the numbers, but I think Mayor Pro Tem probably does. I know there's been some math on, the payback of investment in the arts. So that's another, I think, critical part of economic growth in our city as well. So I've been moved by the comments. Thank you, folks, for reminding us of how things were before COVID. Our current challenges are not just onset by COVID. They're from decades of underinvestment. And if we want to really move forward and invest in growth and invest in new revenue streams, we've got to invest in our staff. So I'm sitting in support of all of the staffing recommendations here. I do think it's critical to move forward, and I certainly want, my last year in my first term at least, on city council to be one where we get to really step forward in investing in some of these growth opportunities. I think the other part of the budget discussion that we're having now is, whether we use the disaster funds. I'm open to that, but I think the proposal for eliminating the disaster funds was a proposal for some downgrading on a CIP project or two. So I'm open to that piece, but I think the staffing adjustments are absolutely critical. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Reynolds. Councilmember Gameros. You're on mute.
Sorry.
It's all good.
So I do have a couple of questions. Several weeks back, we approved a staff recommendation for additional personnel on the cannabis measure. So one thing I was curious about is this going to be in addition to those requests, that request as well, what we're asking for this evening?
Yes, Councilmember Gameros, this is an increase over those positions. The positions that were asked at that point was specifically for the Measure Q processing.
Okay, my understanding was that it was just to help us get by. And I'm kind of jumping on the bandwagon with what Andrea, Mayor Pro Tem Mar said, and that I fully support moving forward with this. I definitely want to make sure that we're not understaffed in any of the positions for safety reasons, for whatever the reason. Everybody here works hard. We're all human. We want to go home at the end of the day and try and relax and not be stressed out because we didn't get something done, taking it home. And I most definitely don't want to see us put a Band-Aid on something that requires a much greater fix. So I would hope that in everybody's ask this evening that we have it covered, because I want to see the right investment for this community, for our city, for the people that work here. That's extremely important to me. The workers that work here deserve to come in and put in an honest day's pay, honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and go home and be able to enjoy their lives and their family. So I do additionally support this, and all that I ask is that we do indeed cover what we need and get it handled. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just, if I could, before we go to the seconds, express myself a little bit. So I just want to remind everybody a little bit about some of the challenges that we've had, at least over the last 5 years that I've been here, that impacted some of our spending. And some of these were non-recurring, but they straddled budget years, and they were actually very expensive. And the one that one of the big ones was addressing issues involving sober living homes. And we spent in 2018 going to 2019, $6.5 million on that issue out of the general fund, just on the trial. And now we're going up into the Ninth Circuit. We've got all these cases that have been pending the whole time. That was a huge investment of, I'd say, round numbers, $10 million over a number of budgeted periods to address that issue. And then no sooner did we kind of get so that we were moving a little bit past that, or actually there was some overlap, in fact, we were hit with our lawsuit involving the Catholic workers lawsuit. And that resulted in the settlement agreement that caused us to spend $6.7 million on the shelter, and then also incur a $3.5 million in additional homeless services, of which now we just approved 1.7 million out of our general fund. Why am I telling you this? I'm glad we spent that money. I voted on every single one of those. Every dollar that was spent, I voted and approved on, and I would do it again. But it is some explanation for diversion of resources that now, to a certain extent, perhaps is coming to roost, where we have now positions that should have been filled a while back, and they haven't been, and there's been some delay, and there's some frustration that we're seeing from our constituents. I found the presentation of the directors compelling to almost every single, with some exception, which I'm not going to get into, almost every single position. I found your presentations compelling, and I know all of you, and you have a tremendous amount of credibility banked with me, and so I appreciate everything you say. And it goes without saying that I feel the same way about Lorianne and Carol. I think kind of the biggest thing that that we're hearing across the departments is this issue of an applicant comes in and they want to do business in our city, and because of short staffing, they're unable to move their project through whatever that project is. And I know I hear that a lot. And I've talked to other council members who get that feedback. And I do appreciate the the kind of the cross departmentalized working on that, and the statement that was made, what difference does it make if we increase the planning department, but we don't increase Raja's department, and then we don't increase going to Chief Stefano, the fire inspector, because at the end of the day, they're all working together in tandem on a particular applicant. I found that that was a pretty compelling point. But I want to stop there and ask a question. Chief Stefano, and I think Jennifer mentioned this idea of being able to get, revenues. That's a revenue generating activity. If we don't have the people to process those permits, we're not able to get those permit fees, and therefore we forgo revenue. And if we got that revenue, then I think an argument could be made. I mean, I don't think it's been made mathematically in this presentation, but an argument can be made that we're actually losing money because we don't have the staff to generate the permit funds. And then something that Mayor Pro Tem Mara has talked about for years and years is, where are we at with their fees on that? We just went through a process with the cannabis fee where we increased and then even decreased some fees in that regard. So my first question is, if we look at the numbers here, that we need to get to hit our nut to hire these people that we need, will hiring those people generate more revenue? And is there an opportunity to pass those costs on to the applicant, who's the direct beneficiary of that revenue, as opposed to having the taxpayer subsidize the applicant to the extent that our fees are too low right now?
If I may answer, Mayor Stevens, you are correct in that the revenues at this point do not assume the increase of revenues with the oncoming of the staff that would generate those revenues. So yes, as the staff would come in and they come on board and train for those positions, we would be seeing an increase of those revenues. On the cost recovery piece, the city was in the process of doing a citywide cost recovery study when the pandemic hit. So we were really in the throes of looking at every one of our fees and starting to identify which ones we wanted to start to tackle first. However, with the pandemic, that essentially was shelved. We are looking with the cost recovery specialist, as you may recall, Terry Maxson from ClearSource, who presented the Measure Q. He was the one that was also working on the other citywide fees. I have already talked to him about coming back to the citywide cost recovery fee study, and hopefully in this year be able to tie those numbers out and start to strategize what would make sense to come back. Because yes, I do agree that the need to be addressed. However, that being said, we're still in the pandemic, so we want to make sure that we're cognizant of the impacts of those fees, specifically because there were some fees that were discussed earlier over the last course of the study session and the public hearing, where we may want to take a look at going and potentially the other side. But that analysis has not been done yet because essentially of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know whether this is true or whether anybody on this Zoom call, including my colleagues, would agree with me, but I would just tell you, as a consumer of those services, recently we're doing a remodel, and it was pretty good. There was a tiny delay. We would have paid a little bit more if we could have avoided a delay. I mean, it was not a consequential delay from our standpoint, but so I just think that I hear more people complaining about the delays in getting permits and getting applications through than I think I would hear about the cost. I don't ever hear about the cost. So that tells me just anecdotally that we may be in a good position to do that. And then that would help us justify these increased positions, because at the end of the day, it's still my concern. And I mean, I just think it's whether my concern is overcome by some of the arguments made by my colleagues in terms of my vote, or the department that remains to be seen. I mean, it's a study session and I'm going to think about it. But when I look at this, unless I'm missing something, we're bringing back the defunded positions and we're saying, well, let's, and that's like, we're using already a fair amount of ARP money for that, $7 million. And then that'll leave us with about $6.5 million in the ARP that we have until 2024 to spend. That'll bridge us a little bit in the reduction in revenue going forward. And of course, we're all hoping that the revenue recovers. No question about that. But these positions that we're taking are recurring positions. The point I made before, we're going to have to, when you hire somebody, you just don't hire them for this year or next year. I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't already know. They're yours for 60 years because they work here potentially for 30 years and then they live 30 more years, and that's a pension obligation, which I'll get to in a second. And then we got the $3.2 million, the disaster reserves. We're not going to be in a position to use the disaster reserves most likely even next cycle. So we have to be able to justify being able to pay these positions out of operating revenue on an ongoing basis. And that meets our long-term fiscal sustainability position, platform or whatever priority, which is a serious priority. All of them are serious. You guys made good points. I don't disagree with the points and the passion of Mayor Pro Tem Mar. I think she makes a lot of good points. The other thing is we've never seen, I don't think, unless it's buried and I haven't seen it, is what will be the increase in our underfunded pension liability if we include these positions? Has that been calculated?
So the positions are fully loaded. So it's including the PERS cost, but there is no unfunded liability associated with a new position. So our unfunded liabilities by definition relate to people that have been already employed by the city for many years, for whom we did not put enough into the pension fund for them. And so the unfunded liability is not associated with any new positions. The unfunded liability is a fixed dollar amount. We get that every year from the actuaries over at PERS. That's in the budget right now, that dollar amount, whether or not we fund these positions.
Okay, I got it.
Is their own pension cost, which is a smaller cost. Yeah.
So you're saying that you've considered what we call the normal costs of pensions.
Correct.
In the fully burdened
That's good, John.
cost. I
Yeah,
know.
normal cost. That's good.
I
Yeah.
was on the first what do you call it? Pension advisory committee. So we're considering the normal cost in the in the fully loaded amount, but you're saying that there will be no addition to our underfunded pension obligation by virtue of these positions being approved, right?
Correct. The unfunded liability has nothing to do with these new positions. And again, that's a fixed dollar amount. And we have that dollar amount that won't change. PERS won't give us a new, if you will, actuarial associated with these positions. So the unfunded liability changes based on how PERS does in the market. If they do better or worse, then the unfunded liability gets better or worse. But again, it's for a fixed point in time. And that cohort of individuals for whom we did not put enough into the pension system for the benefits that they'll be deriving when they retire, which has nothing to do with these new positions that are being added to the budget.
And Lorianne, if I could use that, call you Lorianne. You're telling us, I think, with your confession, that if you had it to do over again, you would choose a different 4 positions as your priority positions as presented. Is that right?
I'm not sure that I would. To be honest, they're all priorities. As we went through this and I sat down with each department for 2-3 hours, going through it, going back over it with finance, nailing every single recommendation. Do they need it or not? Just so you know, there's 3 million in asks and requests from departments that are not included in this budget. And so I didn't bring forward to you everything that departments requested. And so I'm sure that there was already, from department standpoint, a certain degree of disappointment, as is always the case. When you're putting a budget together, you don't get everything that you ask for. And so in my attempt to meet council's request on, what are some possible alternatives, I put together a couple of positions that are priorities for the council, a couple of positions that are priorities for us. But quite frankly, I did a disservice, to be honest, when trying to narrow it down to 4 positions, which is why you have so many alternatives. It's how do we slice and dice this in a way that makes sense? And so I would not, if I had to do it over again, I'd just eliminate that alternative altogether, to be honest.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just, for what it's worth, listening to the presentations, I would probably not put the art specialist in there this particular year in the top 4. The other 3 that you have, I think are strong choices. But I think that, like I said, I'll say it again, the department directors made compelling points. Okay, last question, and then we'll go to the second round if there is one, or else do some parting shots. Is do you think it is doable or realistic to come back in a week and do the thing that I've asked for? Maybe it's of no interest to any of the other council members, but to go out and do some projecting or some pro formas or something and say, these are revenue producing positions, and these positions will basically pay for themselves and then some. And we will be in a better position in terms of our revenues and expenses if we hire these people. They are, I think, as Mayor Pro Tem Mar said, an investment. There's a return on investment, and we will get that return on investment. Is it realistic to do that by Tuesday? And if not, when do you think it would be realistic? Because the reason I ask is maybe what we do is we pass a budget and then we look at some of the other positions in a month or 2 or whatever, and you're only a month or 2 behind, but we have the fiscal justification to support our votes.
So, Mayor Stevens, I'm not sure that I would know how to go about beginning the exercise of trying to attribute new revenue generation just to these positions, as opposed to all the positions that we have and then the addition of these. If it would help, however, I think maybe a way to get at something similar would be to Carol, we can probably try to resuscitate from where we were with the cost recovery exercise that we didn't get a chance to complete because of COVID. I think we started getting some initial estimates of how far behind our cost recovery was. And then knowing that we have to finish that study, we could talk about what that gap is that would be filled, rough estimates of how much more we could achieve in cost recovery when we finish that study, which we could undergo in the next fiscal year, that would support funding these positions or a cohort of these positions. I think that's something that we might be able to put together a little faster for the budget. I wouldn't recommend putting that into the budgeted revenue estimates, however, because we haven't done that yet. But it is an exercise that we were already undertaking. And yes, there would be a nexus between having positions to process permits a lot faster and then getting the permit fees faster. And so I think that's something that's achievable, as Jennifer King's not on the call, so easy to say. So I think we could try to put that together. But I think the larger, and we can do that, Mayor Stevens, if that gives you comfort. But I think we have some real strong foundational principles built into this budget. For one, we have not dipped into reserves yet during this entire pandemic. I don't know of many cities who can say that. I know of cities that are issuing bonds to pay for operating costs. And so generations of grandchildren and great-grandchildren 30 years from now will be paying for 1 year's worth of operating costs that they can't afford, or pensions that they've already paid for 20 years, and now they're pushing out for another 30. So now 5 decades of payments will be made in pension obligation bonds. I know cities that are doing that. And so we're not coming with funny gimmicks and hocus pocus and basically budgeting out, basically indebting ourselves out into the future in order to deal with operating costs. And so the budget that you have is balanced. We have healthy reserves at 53 million. That's the same amount of reserves that some of our cities have that we're next to that have a budget that's twice our size. And so we have a very solid reserve that we haven't dipped into yet. And so I think that we have solid fundamentals. If you look at the information that Carol presented, on the recurring revenue side, we're only estimating about a 4% revenue growth. The United States Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is the United States Bureau responsible for projecting our national GDP, is trending closer to 6%. And so we're more conservative in terms of our recurring revenue numbers than even our own United States chief economists. We're cheaper than them. So Carol and I squeeze this budget more than even the economists think.
Why did you do that? Why didn't you just use something closer to what's being, why be conservative? Why not?
For two reasons. For two reasons. One is it's always good to be conservative because it gives you more flexibility if something does happen. Sober living home cases, a pandemic, other lawsuits, et cetera. Any disaster, earthquake, we're prone to that. And so you have that. And two, we are building in an estimate for cannabis. And so we do have about 3 million built into the budget between the taxes and the fees. And so we felt that between a conservative estimate on recurring with sort of a middle of the road estimate on the cannabis, all in, it's a strong budget. And so we felt comfortable with that. And we'll monitor it. And like any budget throughout the year, it'll change. We may come back and say, oh, cannabis is 1 million, property tax is 2 million higher. We monitor it every month, we watch it closely, and then we make changes as we go.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. So let's go with Councilmember. Let's go with Councilmember Harlan, and then we'll go with Mayor Pro Tem Mar.
Thank you, Mayor Stevens. So at this point, I'm inclined to support the recommendations regarding staffing. I think, like Mayor Stevens said, there have been some very compelling arguments made, and both from staff as well as my colleagues. I did want to go back to the disaster reserves question because I do appreciate the effort that staff went into to achieve a balance without the use of these. And it does seem like the two, or at least there's one capital improvement project, which was the gun range, seemed to be able to be dealt with mid-year. If that's still an option, I think I'd be supportive of that. I want to make sure we have flexibility to use the disaster reserves, which is what I think we are agreeing to. But if we can avoid making those kinds of commitments right now from the capital improvement stage, I would support that. And then lastly, Ms. Farrell Harrison, we had a quick offline conversation a few weeks back about an item that I wanted to come back to, which was a potential to provide no cost or extremely low cost summer camp this year, and whether or not that was an option under ARP if we had the funding to do that. I believe it was Councilmember Chavez and maybe Councilmember Reynolds had also raised the issue of that, of how important that is. And if we have the availability and can do it from a mechanical standpoint, I want to make sure that we at least have explored that.
I'll respond then. I think Jason might also have some additional points to share. So we've talked two different ways to be able to achieve that. One would be sort of an across the board, parks and community services programs are free this summer due to, we want all the kids back and we want equitable access. And so we would have an across the board type of situation. And then, we would have to offset the cost through, whatever means we have to find through the budget. So we had cut these programs previously. It is eligible via ARP to restore on the staffing side. And so we'd have to look at the numbers a little bit more closely. But the second option would be to do it more on a scholarship or grants basis through the Community Foundation or even through a program of our own, but the Community Foundation's already set up to do this. They've done it in the past. And then that way, at a minimum, we do achieve revenue into the city from families that can afford to enjoy the service. But then for families that have a hardship and can prove that they have a financial hardship, they'd be able to receive a scholarship through the foundation. And we could actually do a grant to the foundation that's city supported. Usually they do their fundraising, but if it was council's direction, we could do a community grant to the foundation for them to operate it. And so, Jason, did you want to fill in more there?
Yes, I do apologize. The sun is coming through my window at a very odd angle. However, as Lorian mentioned, we are working with the Costa Mesa Foundation. There was a program set up in years past that allowed people to donate into basically a pot of money that would be allocated for those in need for our programs. We do have free camp programs that were offered this summer. However, they filled up rather quickly, as you can imagine, and we do have significant wait lists for them. As we continue to try to bring on new staff, we try to open up more programs or more spots to take people off the wait list, but we are having a challenge in getting staff positions filled to accommodate the number of participants that are on our wait list. We also are considering a scholarship program that would likely come back to the council at a later date, in which a pot of money is set aside from whatever the different source might be, where scholarships can be applied for by the public. They would be basically scored based on their income levels, and then we could award money to those families in most need. So we have a couple of those scholarship type grant possibilities that are happening. And then, we did have the free camp programs that, as I mentioned, filled up rather fast.
Okay, so it sounds like it can be done. And as a former board member of the foundation, I'd love to see them to be involved in this. I know it's been challenging over the last year plus, not being able to run the concerts in the park series as they've had in the past, but they're an important part of our community and obviously are there to help. So, I'll put it to my colleagues if there's an interest in this, but from my vantage point, I'd love to see that happen this year. All right, those are all my comments, Mr. Mayor.
They're running the beer garden, council member, the foundation. So at the
Yes.
At the July 31st event.
Right.
Mayor Pro Tem Mar.
Thank you. So I apologize. I was 10 or 15 minutes late to the beginning of this, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding where we're at currently in terms of like the use of the disaster reserves. So my sense is that you will be coming back. Please correct me if I'm wrong with any of the city manager, but my sense is that you'll be coming when we take this to a vote finally. The likelihood is that you will be asking us to authorize, assuming everyone's on board with all of the recommended staffing, up to some amount likely to come out of disaster reserves, unless we make additional changes like reducing the staffing or like cutting out the range. But even if we give you the authorization and keep everything in the budget, there's still a chance that you may not actually need it based on how this year ends and what happens next year. Correct?
So the second is correct. So
okay.
We may not need to use the reserves, even though we had put it in the proposed budget. But as of, if you decide to go with the option tonight that was presented in terms of the taking out the firing range, transferring certain projects to other restricted funds, then we would not be using the reserves at all next year. But we would still be able to fulfill and fund all of the positions that departments have requested.
Okay. So are you looking for guidance tonight on how we're feeling about that specific piece? Okay. Got it. So, clearly based on earlier rant, I support giving you the flexibility to use those funds required. And I would not be in favor of reducing any of the planned capital projects at this time. I love the idea also of providing all of the camps and finding ways to engage with the the philanthropic community in order to make that happen this year. And then the last piece, just on this question of sort of cost effectiveness and potential revenue generation. I think there's also an opportunity cost, and not that I'm going to ask you to do this exercise because you do not have time for this, but conceivably, how many folks are not building ADUs because they don't want to go through the process right now because they know we're super backed up. How many folks are not doing things in the city because they've heard about what's going on? How many businesses are not opening because they don't want to bother dealing with the city? So I think that's even harder to do than figuring out the revenue coming from an art specialist, but I think that there's another side to that coin that I just felt compelled to point out. Thank you.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all my council members, peers for your good comments. Definitely changed my mind on a couple things. So before I make my comments, my last comments, for Ms. Farrell Harrison, just for the public's knowledge and my knowledge, how do we accrue disaster reserve funds? Do we allocate a bit every year to that fund? Is that how it works?
No. So the declared disaster of all our reserves, Carol, can you bring up the one slide that has all of the different fund balance designations?
So, Lorianne, I think it was the question, how do we accrue, or how do we build those funds?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go through it very quickly. So the reserves are basically held in abeyance, or they're just held on the side of the budget. They are not part of the annual budget. They're there only in the case of emergencies. And so this funding amount is static. It's invested, if you will, in our bank account, either in our checking account or with the state treasurer to earn very nominal small funds just to keep them safe. But the reserves are only used for very specific purposes and in the event of certain emergencies. In the event of, so we have 53 million total. That's the first thing I wanted to point out. And that's a robust amount of reserves for a city our size. It's one of the things that gave me a lot of comfort in coming here to be the city manager, because the last thing I wanted to do was not have a backup plan if the budget goes awry, right? If there's a financial crisis or an emergency, you need places to turn. And so we have a total of 53 million. The declared disasters is just one of the many funds. As you can see, it's the one on top. That funding was set aside over a series of years. It has not been touched. It's typically not budgeted on a recurring basis for ongoing costs. You can only use it if there is a declared disaster. So let's say there's a financial crisis that's not a declared disaster. We couldn't access that pot of funds. We could use the economic reserves, which is a couple of lines below, but not that one. That specific reserve pot is just for a declared disaster, one that we have to issue a declaration for, or a higher level of government. So COVID is one of those rare instances where there is such a magnitude of an event that you can dip into the declared disaster reserves. We didn't have to dip into the reserves in 1920 for that last quarter, when in March 2020, COVID hit. We closed the year, didn't have to do it. And as of right now, we don't believe we'll need to dip into it for the fiscal year that ends at the end of this month. And so we're still gonna explore it and see how the revenue comes in. At one point, we thought we might need to dip into it about 4 million. Then it looked like maybe 2. At this point, we may not need to dip into it at all. And if we were to, it's looking closer to about 2 million, which would leave us at 12. And then, of course, we made the recommendation to have a bridge for next year to be able to achieve certain goals. And that was including the budget to do another 3 million. But at this point, we haven't touched it at all. And we may not need to touch it in the current fiscal year.
Okay. And thank you for keeping up the screen, Ms. Molina. I think it's very important to show the public how declared disasters is 14 million and reserves are 9 million. So essentially what I'm kind of hearing is we have a unique opportunity to use these declared disaster funds to really get our city up to the place we've wanted to get up to since the time I've been on council. And I appreciate you guys walking me through the process to get to this point and realizing that. So I think hearing everyone's considerations like on the dais, I'm comfortable with the fully staffing. I actually appreciate Ms. Earl Harrison that you and Ms. Molina budgeted less economic growth than the national is saying at 4% versus 6%. That's one of the things again about being conservative that I mentioned before. And I guess it's important to realize the reason why I mentioned conservative so much is, you know, I grew up not very affluent, right? I grew up with a set budget. You know, I have an apartment because I budget very well, not because I make a lot of money. And one of the things that I want to be comfortable when we do vote on this budget next week is knowing full well that I'm not putting us in a position where our city is going to falter in a few years because we're being over ambitious. What I've heard today so far is that that's not going to be the case. So I feel a bit more cautious. I feel a bit more optimistic today having this study session. So I appreciate everyone's time. And I think it cannot be understated two things. We cannot understate the morale it's going to give our staff. I've always said that we have the best staff in Orange County because we do. Our employees really work hard and do the best they can with what they have. And they've never once failed us. And I mean that sincerely. So if this is going to alleviate our staff and give them a better quality of life, while at the same time raising the standard of service for our community, while at the same time not putting us in a financially precarious situation, then I am fully comfortable supporting this measure. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reynolds.
Mute button here. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Harlan for bringing up the additional funding to make sure that summer activities, especially this year for youth, are accessible and affordable for as many people as possible. That was something I had raised either last meeting or a couple meetings ago, and just want to express my continued support for that. Hearing a wait list on any of the programs, if there's a wait list, there's certainly demand. I'm sure there's other folks who haven't put their name on the wait list because they either think they can't afford it or they've heard things are closed. Whatever we can do to support, opportunities for people to re-engage, be out, have some enjoyment, again, especially for youth, which supports all of our families in Costa Mesa, I'm supportive of. I'm curious if another option is available too. We do have a number of existing community-based organizations that provide similar services. I'm thinking of SOY, of course, the Wilson Street Learning Center, which I spoke about at our last meeting. There's like Hillcrest. I'm sure there's a dozen other organizations like that. I wonder if exploring maybe grants supporting, if capacity is an issue, if we know there's demand that we can't meet with our own staffing, and that's a way to expand capacity this summer to provide some grants to those organizations. I'd be interested in exploring that as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councilmember Gameros, do you have any parting shots? Right, you're good. Okay, so here's my parting shots. One thing, I'm sorry I can't let you guys off this call without bringing this topic up. So, over the weekend, I played golf. Shocking, right? And I was in the cafe. Actually, on one of the days, Councilmember Harlan was with me, and we're in the cafe, and one time it was 10 o'clock and the other time it was like 9 o'clock, and us and only one other party was in there. And where we talk about investing money, where we talk about getting a return on investment, I always used to bristle at the notwithstanding my comments about return on investment, but I used to bristle at this idea that we should run the city like a business. Because I don't believe it is. I mean, it's as I think Carol pointed out, it's a service organization. However, the exception to that is when you own a business, and we have a business and it's not throwing off even though it's done very well in the last year, but there's a lot of revenue over there that we're leaving on the table. And I want to thank all of the directors. You guys have done a wonderful job. I do notice, though, getting back to the golf course, it doesn't seem to me like there's a director who's specifically tasked to follow up on making sure that the golf course hits their revenue number and has people in the seats in the cafe. That might be something to think about because it's that revenue that allows us to do some of the things that we're talking about. And it's not there just because I think we just need to give it a little bit more tender, loving care and investment, both capital and human investment and attention. And the other thing I want to say real quick, I think to answer Councilmember Chavez's comments is, we've been talking because of the pandemic and various things we've been doing over the last few years about using reserves, and there are years where we have a surplus, and by the grace of God, maybe this will be the year. And so when you get to the end of that year, then you have the luxury of being able to say, sometimes it's mid-year, what are we going to do with the money, our profit, if you will? And that's how these reserve accounts are built up. And the city council makes a decision, do we want to put it in disaster or economic or unrestricted, or do we want to do a capital improvement project that we hadn't thought about or something like that? So I do hope we have that opportunity to make that vote at some point in time. Finally, I just want to say for the parting shot, from the bottom of my heart, Lorianne, Carol, all the directors, thank you. You guys have been through a whole lot. This has been a challenging budget. We are toward the finish line. We've got one more week and then we get a month off. I really appreciate you. I really do. So, and I think I speak for the council and the community. I really treasure the work that you're doing and appreciate it. Anybody else? We can adjourn. We're adjourned.